Thank you very much for being here, for the invitation to come to Prague. It was not much of a hesitation to decide whether I should come alive or online. It's a beautiful opportunity to visit you all and this beautiful city. And I just realized they're out now, but I tick all three boxes actually. I'm an educator, so a landscape architecture educator. I represent a university, a Polytechnico de Delft. And I just recently put 4 Velux windows in my roof, in my private house. So I tick all 3 boxes. So probably that's why I'm here. I tick another box, which is related to the work I still do and did in recent years, basically as an advisor for the public sector, many levels of scale and complexity. And I still combine those two, or well, several assignments and appointments. So I chair the section of landscape architecture for 2 days per week, and that allows me to also be in touch with practice. What I'm going to talk about and share with you is the following 4 items. I will shortly, briefly tell you something about the regional landscape programs that I have been involved with over a period of many years. One of them is the water defense line, which, as Jan presumed, is related to, let's say, present urgencies on sea level rise and all that. But it's not. It's a heritage system based on controlled inundation to keep out the enemy. It's a 19th century megastructure, which was recently sort of revitalized. And the other is the program of Room for the River, a large, intensive, expensive program on, let's say, enlarging the discharge capacity of the River Rhine and IJssel. I will then say something about the landscape architectural position I had and others had, colleagues of mine, were in the same field in the context of these projects and programs. And then we'll come back to education. So let's try to do that in more or less half an hour. This is the first program. So this is real stuff. It's basically related to the fact that the Netherlands, as you might have visited it, is a very horizontal, linear system. It's a landscape of flatness. Moreover, we're also at the end of major river systems like the Meuse, which has its source in France, and the Rhine, which has its source in Switzerland. And all that water that falls or melts comes to our country and has to be neatly discharged to the North Sea. And until, let's say, 20 years ago, we believed that with the continuous reinforcement of river dikes, we would be able to keep the water out of parts of the country that should not be inundated. But we also, let's say, kept thinking in terms of how can we add more strategies than just keeping up these dikes. So a program started called Room for the River, which carefully selected sites, specific sub-locations and regions in the river system to see to what extent let's say the river section could be extended. And these are, let's say, the images. You might say, okay, so this had to be prevented, but this is actually the result of Room for the River, is that the water can run freely over a very wide range of area and without doing any damage. So this is what we might call controlled inundation, to be able to cope with the enormous amounts of water that come in from Germany and Belgium and France. So what had to be done? Well, this is just a summary or an inventory of all the measurements, you might call them river civil engineering or hydrological civil engineering measurements that were to be taken in many times combinations of these different strategies were designed and operationalized. And here you see some examples of what actually happened. Does this thing have a pointer as well? I think it does, yeah. So these are two different areas. You see the meandering IJssel River, which runs north and ends in the IJssel Lake. And here, the extension of the, let's say, the river section. So this was the part that was already available for inundation, for controlled inundation between these two dikes. It was decided that this dike should be replaced in this place and the other one as well. So this is the original dike and it had to be relocated over here. You can imagine that it sort of meant that this section, which until today remains to be an agricultural area, had to be reconfigured. And here you see in 4 slides or in 4 takes the effect. This is the original situation in one of those 2 projects. Here you see, if you look close, the existing dike, which runs here and goes here, and then takes the meander up to here. And here you see the new dike, which of course, in a sense, is a landscape architectural challenge to design a new river dike. You also see that the, let's say the agricultural homesteads, all the farm buildings have been replaced and the area itself is available for farming. And then you have this, let's say, an area, a landscape ready for inundation without doing any harm to anybody. The upper image is once per year and the lower image once every 5 years. Other measurements, like for example, excavating parts of the flooding areas to allow more water to be stored, is on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, the construction of a new, also very wide and broad dike to allow water to come in this area. Here you see at the city of Nijmegen, close to the German border, where the river Waal is now, let's say, was rather, let's say, narrow, which caused quite some damage every once in a while in the Nijmegen inner city. And it was decided to take this dike up, relocate it here, and have a small island in the river here and allow the river to flood in this section. Other types of new landscape elements had to be constructed, and before they could be constructed, they had to be designed. You can imagine that. So here's another example. This is more downstream, in which a large area was made available for inundation, for controlled inundation by, sorry, can I go back? Yeah, I can go back. By allowing water coming from here to go under this line. So there were 4 entries created to allow the water to come in and inundate parts of this now or formerly completely agricultural area. And as you can see, there are 3 sort of levels of controlled inundation possible. And just recently, with the high waters of a month ago, this complete area was inundated. So it works, actually. The whole program is finalized. It's been constructed and delivered and cost about 4.2 billion euros, spread out in over 30 to 40 different projects. The experience I had was member of the quality team to advise on spatial coherence of the whole project. You can imagine that with this program, it was clear that existing ownership, existing activity, agricultural activity, existing values in terms of nature and ecological qualities, recreational potential, all had to be taken into the basket and reconfigured and redesigned to allow this program to actually be executed. So we needed many different sorts of expertise And this is just a rough number of people and professions that were integrated into this program. Also, many different landscape architects who took up different projects to be designed. My role was as a chairman of the quality team to see that all these projects would sort of in one way or another be familiar to each other because we were intervening in one river system. This is the second project. This is the new Dutch water defense line. I was having a summer holiday in Italy last month, and the news reached me that UNESCO decided that this whole system now should be on the World Heritage List. So after 20 years of hard work, it actually is now a world monument. And this is how we found it in 2001. A large series of fortresses, more or less inaccessible, left to themselves. And here you see let's say the original system that already dates back to the 16th century, which is the old defense line, also controlled inundation. Here you see the city of Amsterdam. So it's the western part of the country that is defended by controlled inundation of low-lying polders. This is the new Dutch defense line. Here's Amsterdam again. So you see part of it was sort of reinstalled in the 19th century, and part, which included the city of Utrecht, were sort of taken in, were introduced into the new defense system. And this whole inundation system, military defense system, allowed the separate cities in the West to take off their military works surrounding them and actually expand. So this played an enormous role in the upgrading and the upscaling of national defense. But of course, with the invention of airplanes, this whole system suddenly became obsolete and sort of an unnecessary relic from the past. This is why it is here. In the middle, you see, it just sort of defines the subtle transition between higher and lower grounds, as we call them in Holland. It needs the professional eye to actually see the difference, but in terms of water management, it is a relevant gradient. On the left-hand side, you see the different basins. So the water management decision areas, and with the black stars, and there you see, and there are the fortresses on this map, you see where inundation would not work, and other types of military defense works had to be introduced to be able to keep the enemy out. And in this case, the enemy was expected to come from the east, as you can imagine. So here you see the projection of the old megastructure. This is about 120 kilometers in length and various width on the 2001 topography. And you see here, let's say a diagonal between Amsterdam, Utrecht, and Den Bosch, with all sorts of major infrastructural going through, meaning that this area would also be continuously, let's say, in a high spatial dynamic, so to speak. So the question here was, how can we sort of revitalize this heritage system and conserve it and restore it, and at the same time redirect all this urban pressure and agricultural pressure at the same time? And we decided to come up with a strategy which said we will allow spatial dynamics, but in a way that it brings this beautiful historical system further to expression. That's basically, in a nutshell, the way we approach this. Here you see some relics of the Dutch defense line, and of course, immediately it's the fortresses, it's the built artifacts that attract the attention, but basically the essential part of this whole system was controlled inundation. Some examples, just briefly, to see what happened to these fortresses. They were sometimes still owned by the Ministry of Defense, sometimes by municipalities, 2 or 3 of them. This is a collection of about 40 fortresses, all different. 2 or 3 of them were privatized and inhabited. And this is an example of a fortress near Utrecht that was adopted by the municipality and revitalized by a entrepreneur who started a bar and a restaurant and a sleeping place there. Here's another example, also near Utrecht, the north. These black and white photographs, by the way, were taken by the Royal Air Force, the British Royal Air Force, in the last year of the Second World War, to be sure about the way the whole country was, let's say, susceptible to defense by the occupying forces. And the irony of the Dutch water defense line is that it was actually never used to stop enemies coming in, but it was used by the German troops in 1945 to stop Allied troops to come to the west of the country. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful story. It also explains why a lot of these artifacts are still intact. You know, they were never used in a military context. Here you see additions to this old fort, and the revenues that came out of these additions allowed the whole fortress to be restored. So a beautiful combination of efforts. Here you see another example, the former situation, a fortress that was left more or less to itself, and squatters came in and closed the fence and said, this is ours. So from a military purpose, it became a anarchistic house, so to speak. The municipality, who still owned this fort, said, and now let's redefine the relevance of this fort and have landscape architect Ronald Rietveld design a new perspective. And here you see the existing situation. It's, let's say, new public space in the rural context. That's how I would define this sort of interventions. Here's another example, a major fortress in the heart of the whole system, aligned by Highway A2, which goes from east to west in the country. And here you see the intervention designed by landscape architects West 8 from Rotterdam, who decided that this overgrown situation would profit from, let's say, an 80 meters wide haircut that allowed restoration, a sort of a partial restoration, allowing the major part to be more or less intact, and a new part that referred to the former part. Beautiful project, and implemented in a very precise way. And of course, there's also waterworks. As I said, the essence of this whole system was controlled inundation, and all the artifacts that were necessary to have this done were also taken up in this program, partly restored, partly reused, and partly also reinterpreted. Here you see two water retention areas that allows for water storage when heavy rainfall sort of is to be safeguarded and is to be stored. And of course, controlled inundation is also a new responsibility for all these water management organizations that the country has. So it's controlled inundation 21st century. Okay, so summarizing the Dutch water defense line experience, many different projects, many different historians, both general historians as well as military historians who had a specific idea about the value and the significance of this whole system. Many designers, many architects as well, who were involved in the, let's say, the delicate additions and modifications on these fortresses, which at that time were already a national monument as a whole. The whole collection was considered a national monument. But also, let's say, entrepreneurial experts who were giving advice on the potential, the commercial, economical potential of parts of the Dutch defense line, and many landscape architects. And again, one quality team to safeguard the internal and external coherence and consistency of all the work. And I was able to also be a member and later chair this quality team. So beautiful work, large scale projects, publicly financed, many different actors, both on a governmental level as well as on the, let's say, the more public and private level. Many years of preparation and execution, and all more or less, let's say, continuously supervised by a team of different design and other expertise. So what you might conclude from this, let's say, activities, and I speak, I explain this from my personal experience, is that my profession or my discipline rather takes a rather extensive scope. We're rapidly emancipating, you might say, at least in the Dutch conditions, from, let's say, garden and park design to very large, very extensive, very complex spatial challenges that in principle are considered first and for all landscape projects. So the landscape potential as such is considered paramount. The most important part of the criteria come from landscape observations. And that means that it has both a disciplinary as well as an interdisciplinary competence. I invited or encouraged others to sort of look for landscape architectural know-how and experience to deal with separate spots, separate objects, separate spatial alterations and modifications. And at the same time, was able to sort of see and supervise on what I call the spatial coherence, which actually is an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary check that you are performing. So I see both competences in this discipline taking place. It has to be said, though, that you can invite young and starting landscape architects and designers to jump on a specific fortress or a specific new dike. But as far as I'm concerned, I was happy to have sort of an experienced life of 25 years of supervising other stuff before I was able, and let's say had sufficient self-confidence to be chairing those quality teams. So it's also a matter of, let's say, professional maturity to be able to actually be in this interdisciplinary context. Both analytical and synthesizing contribution, as you might understand. So landscape architects are very well able to sort of, put things apart and draw conclusions on quality as such, but also being able to put things together again in a new and probably better composition or ensemble, and therefore can be considered both expert as well as generalist. It's a beautiful bridge to this morning's debate and conversation on what are we, what do we represent actually? What's our story to clients and to the public? It's both, but you have to be clear about that. And we can talk about that later. So I'm gradually, step by step, coming back to education, because that's now also a responsibility I take. And it's increasingly complex as well to define what is actually the essence of this discipline before it becomes a profession. I also normally tend to distinguish those two phases of let's say the activity, what I call landscape architecture. There's the disciplinary realm in which we feel acquainted, in which we feel related, in which we know we make use of the same fundamentals as were mentioned before as well. On the other hand, how it comes to life, how you deal with clients and assignments and complexity, how you deal with budgets and politicians, that's where the profession starts. And those are different realms. And I think it should be taken into account that educating is about disciplinary behavior and practice is about professional behavior. So be aware of the distinction. Now, coming back to the fundamentals, or cornerstones, as I like to call them, it's It's basically those four. That's also what we teach our students to do, or at least be critical towards those four components. There's never a tabula rasa. There's never a neutral starting situation. There's always a history and a prehistory that you have to take into account, or at least relate to. I think that is one of the essence of landscape architectural responsibility, to make people aware of that there is already a narrative in which you have to relate yourself to, or to what you have to be at least aware of. A spatial continuum, a scale continuum, that's also, I would say, typically landscape architectural. You know, you're very much aware of the fact that you can do a local thing, but it will have impact on a larger scale, and vice versa. Everything that is invented on a larger scale will have impact on the local. So it's good to have your design work checked in that sense, that go through the scales and see what could be learned also from larger scale concepts or small scale initiatives. Thirdly, it's like being a mechanic and the motor is running, you know, so it's finding the ways to adjust things in a way that the process delivers better results. Not so much define the results, but be able to understand the mechanics and to see how this engine actually runs before you intervene. And that also makes landscape architecture sometimes very unspectacular. Only a small alteration could have an enormous impact on topographic quality and landscape appreciation. And it's, I think, one of the essentials of the discipline to be aware of that and to be able to intervene in that way and take your responsibility in not creating huge new horizons, but to be able to see what might come out of a very subtle intervention. And fourthly, it is about human perception. You know, landscape as such, you can think of paintings, you can think of landscape photography. At the end of the day, it's about visual appreciation. So all those four components are in our curriculum. This might be good as an input for the debate later, because if you take those four components seriously, this is how it relates to other disciplines that are taught in this university and in my university in Delft. So I'm not going to read them all out. If you want, we can, let's see, elaborate on this in the debate. And then to finalize my contribution of this afternoon, this is how we actually teach our students. We're a young track. We exist 10 years now. We just celebrated, under all the COVID restrictions and impediments that we are facing, we celebrated our 10 years anniversary last year. We're producing a book now on 10 years of landscape architectural education, which will be distributed, or it will be launched on the 2nd of December. We are very happy that we have been selected as one of the 8 best schools of landscape architecture through the Barcelona Biennale, which is a 2-yearly landscape architectural festivity, an event. So in the end of September, there will be a presentation on our school with the other 7 finalists, and then the jury will decide who will be the utmost best. Of course, we're already happy that within a period of 10 years, we made it to the last 8. I was very happy to see also that the School of Milan is one of the finalists as well, from the landscape architecture section, which is even a younger section. So we have strong competition. Anyway, I'm not going to explain all this. What you should take with you is this is the first year and this is the second year, and it's all about landscape architecture. We permit ourselves, we allow ourselves to be a full-blown landscape architectural master track. So no fuzziness, no architecture here, no urban design here. Let's first focus on the disciplinary responsibilities, our, let's say, our common repertoire, ways of dealing and doing with landscape. And we have many international students now. It's growing fast, actually, the number of input. As you could see, it's a program which is divided in 2 years. The first year is in 4 quarters, so rather intensive, 10 weeks design studios with, let's say, aligned by theoretical and methodological input. The 4th quarter in the first year is a free course in which we offer our students to go outside and build something, construct something. And there's beautiful examples of that. And the 2nd year is rather extensive time for your personal development in a graduation project, aligned by methodological and mapping skills. So that's in a nutshell what we offer our students. If you're interested, you can always get into the website and find out more. Thank you very much, Jan, for this talk.